My recent video, The Fatal Flaw of Free Market Capitalism, has generated a healthy amount of discussion, in some circles anyway, and so this led me to performing a bunch of thought experiments which were super fun, and so this video is the result. And just as a quick refresher, anarcho-capitalism is a stateless society where individuals are free to contract with each other and everything else is up to the free market. All the public services are privatized. And I was rather curious as to how this would work in real life. Now, one thing that AnCaps like to bring up to help support the viability of their ideology is the so-called Icelandic Commonwealth, which was, for all intents and purposes, a proto-AnCap society in the Middle Ages. Now, it did manage to exist from 930 until 1262/63, when the Icelanders apparently voted to ask the King of Norway to take over their country. And to quote from the Icelandic Commonwealth's Wikipedia page from the Decline and Fall section, in the early 13th century, the age of the Sturlungs, the Commonwealth began to suffer from chaos and division resulting from internal disputes. Originally, the Godard chieftains functioned more as a contractual relationship than a fixed geographic chieftaincy. However, by 1220, this form of communal leadership was replaced by dominant regional individuals who battled with one another for more control. One historian argues that the chaos and violence of this period stem from an imbalance of power and changes in the nature of Icelandic warfare. Whereas the number of Godard had been at least 39 in the early Icelandic Commonwealth, a few powerful families had consolidated control over most of the Godard in the late 12th century. Now, I don't know about you, but this to me sounds awfully familiar. And my favorite part about this is that the Icelandic Commonwealth failed so hard in the end that people ended up inviting a foreign despot to invade their land because even that was preferable to living in Icelandic AnCap-istan. Now, this was in part a result of the King of Norway exerting pressure on Iceland for a longer time, so some might say that this is cheating and thus isn't fair criticism. But this line of thinking leaves us with three possible options as to why Icecapistan fell. Number one would be because of the Nordic invasion, number two because people were manipulated into voting for the takeover, and number three because people misjudged the situation and made their own call at the ballot box. And I have bad news for AnCaps. All these options prove my point. They show you that an AnCap society would either fall victim to a state's well-organized invasion force, or get subverted by propaganda, or people will vote on a feels over reals basis and end up screwing themselves over. Brexit. And I personally think that if a country would transition into the AnCap model somewhere, a military intervention scenario would be its most likely end. And it would be super convenient too. I mean, there would be no state to declare war on. There is no state. You just roll in with the tanks and announce martial law. Even if some people would resist, it would just be a handful of loosely coordinated militias, if that, against a regular army. And of course, if you have some kind of very powerful high-tech military hardware, you need a very complicated logistics chain to maintain it. You know, Billy Joe can't just tow a Reaper drone to his shack to recalibrate his targeting AI or something. What an average AnCap commune could do at most is maintain or create small arms and crude explosives, maybe. So the AnCap dream stumbles right at the starting line. And right here, right now, I could just stop bothering with all this, but I'd like to dig a little bit deeper. Let's give it all to AnCaps, the most ideal scenario imaginable for the emergence of real-life anarcho-capitalism. An imaginary world where every country transitioned into anarcho-capitalism at the exact same time, all corporations were completely dissolved, all nuclear weapons were disarmed, and all complex military hardware beyond small arms was disposed of. All you have is people living freely with their guns, ready to enter into voluntary contracts with each other, having inherited all the infrastructure built out by the now dissolved governments, and everyone getting a fresh start at capitalism. So I believe that this would be a perfect, or at least near perfect, condition for anarcho-capitalism. So how will things work out? Let's take a look. So our little simulation will have two relevant parameters. Number one is that everybody will act according to their rational self-interest without exception, and number two, there will be no Deus Ex Machina type situations, meaning everything will develop organically as a logical continuation of the events that happened before. So over here we have a network of smaller settlements, each operating their own basic infrastructure just like during medieval times. In these settlements, eventually some people start getting more successful at capitalism than others. Let's call them great men. And we'll be focusing on one of them, this fellow called Billy Bob, living in the town of Einvale. Now Einvale does have its own little water system, but the water quality is not the greatest. It's drinkable, but it tastes kind of funny, and if you have any sort of stomach problems, it just tends to make the problem worse. Now Billy Bob runs a saloon in town, and he thinks thinks the water quality is hindering his sales because it makes his liquor taste worse. And to help run his business smoother, using his knowledge of distillers, he puts together a water purifier so he can disconnect from the local water system and save money, and also have better tasting liquor. Now his water purifier ends up being a success, able to produce large quantities of water with a low energy cost, which is somewhat even better quality than the water from the system. Now he produces more water than he needs by a considerable margin, so he starts selling it off to people. With those profits, plus his increased revenue from liquor sales, he puts together a second machine in his free time. This time he works out some of the bugs, and the new machine turns out to be slightly more efficient and produces even better quality water. He now sells a lot of water and makes large amounts of money. Now Billy Bob is forward-thinking and keeps reinvesting his revenue back into his business. With his profits, he buys a plot of land behind the saloon and builds a huge water storage tank. He also builds out pipes to the farmlands nearby and starts selling his water to the farmers. With his increasing profits, he hires workers to build and maintain water purifiers. Soon enough, he has enough capital to offer a handsome amount for the local water system. The owners like his offer and sell him all their infrastructure. After all, they weren't making as much money on it anyway. They didn't really know what they were doing, the water quality was bad, they had a large maintenance backlog, and most people in Ainville just went on collecting rainwater and boiling it anyway. So they are more than happy to just pull the golden parachute and get rid of all their problems and go on to do something else. Following the acquisition, Billy Bob founds the Bill and Robert Water Company. Now everyone in town is his current or potential customer. Billy Bob has his workers connect his purifiers to the system, filling the pipes with his water. He also spends on maintenance, replacing rusty pipes and leaky valves, which increases the water quality and reduces water loss. His customer base starts to grow rapidly. People happily sign the contract stating that they'll get the water cheaper than under the previous owners and at a guaranteed higher quality. They can also disconnect from Billy Bob's pipes for the equivalent of $1,000 as a service fee, but why would they? The water is cheap and great. As time goes on, other people try to get in on the water business too, offering their own water from their own purifiers. Only a few people switch over though, since Billy Bob's water is reasonably priced and of high quality, and there is a $1,000 disconnect fee which nobody wants to pay. But then a true prodigy appears, an even greater man who creates a water purifier that's even better than Billy Bob's. Worse, he starts selling the water from it, and some people actually switch over and they are very satisfied with the water. It's even cheaper and even better quality. And this even greater man even starts making some money on his business, sucking away profits from Billy Bob. Now Billy Bob gets word of this, so he visits this prodigy personally and offers to buy out his business, but he gets rejected. Now the actions of this prodigy directly threaten Billy Bob's business. He must neutralize this threat as soon as he can. Billy Bob goes on to use his considerable wealth and leverage to artificially lower the price of water even below the competitor's price. Although he goes into the red somewhat, he has enough money stockpiled to survive. The prodigy less so by virtue of being a small business. He also has to lower his price to compete, otherwise nobody would buy water from him. His customers start to dwindle, many switching back over to Billy Bob, who announces a $500 water coupon bonus to be given to all returning customers. After months of losses, the prodigy is at the end of his rope. He spent every bit of money on keeping his business alive. He sold absolutely everything he could, now living on the barest of necessities in an empty apartment, perhaps 1 month away from eviction. At this point, Billy Bob visits him again and makes a new offer. A very pretty sum of cash for his business and a lucrative upper management position within the Bill and Robert Water Company, together with a luxury executive penthouse. He will also have access to a very generous innovation fund which he can use to invent even better water purifiers. And this time he doesn't have to worry about not being able to pay the bills if his inventions prove unsuccessful. Billy Bob takes all the financial risks and the prodigy is free to unleash his creative genius. What's better, for every innovation he gets a huge bonus, with the added caveat that all of them will be the property of the Bill and Robert Water Company and cannot be made open source. The prodigy has to make a choice. He can refuse, go broke, get evicted in a month, and sleep under the bridge wrapped in a filthy blanket, hungry and sick, torturing himself with the thought of the dream he lost. Or he can continue his life's work of inventing purifiers and fulfill his dreams in a position of prestige and wealth, high salary, luxury penthouse, generous bonuses, freedom to innovate. And all he needs to do for this is sign the dotted line. And he does. He becomes general manager of the Bill and Robert Water Company, gets a beautiful penthouse where just a bathroom is twice as big as his entire previous apartment. As promised, he gets to tinker with his designs on the side and gets huge bonuses for his work. He becomes a respected member of the community and everyone admires him for his talents. And Billy Bob now controls the town's entire water market. He stops the price dumping and returns to making massive profits, now even more since the prodigy helps increase the efficiency. With his innovations, that is. But aside from doing his business, Billy Bob also likes to read. Mainly about great men in the past and what they did to succeed. He comes across the idea of buying out as much of the production chain as possible. The chain that supplies the business, that is. So Billy Bob might be selling the water, but it's not his company that manufactures the pipes, or mines the ore to smelt the metal, or makes the parts for the purifiers. And so he goes on to acquire as many of these enterprises as possible using the same tactic, offering management positions and large salaries. By the time he's done, he can build out a water supply system from scratch just using his company resources. He now owns mines, foundries, machine building workshops, and optimizes their production for his goals. Those enterprises might suffer losses due to this, but the water company gets materials much cheaper and the gains far outpace the losses, which Billy Bob of course ends up cross-subsidizing. But Billy Bob doesn't stop there. He becomes obsessed with control. He now owns all of his production chain but decides he wants more. But what else can he acquire? Well, the other end, of course. His biggest customers are farmers who use his water for irrigation. With Billy Bob's advanced irrigation systems made by his foundries and workshops, the farms grew to the point where they could not sustain themselves with their own wells anymore, and so they became dependent on Billy Bob's water. But hey, it's a great deal, so they're not complaining. Billy Bob founds the Bill and Robert Agricultural Company and starts buying out all the land plots around Ainville. His tactics are the same: offer the owners generous terms and occasionally a high position and lucrative salary, if Billy Bob deems the owner to be a potential valuable addition to his team, that is. And so most landowners end up taking his offer. And those who initially don't are either swayed by secret deals where Billy Bob offers them a price well above market, or by threatening with accidents, quote-unquote, happening to the pipes that feed those particular plots. One way or another, Billy Bob ends up owning all the land plots around town, satisfying his growing urge for ownership and control, for the time being anyway. And because of his great public business practices, nobody opposes him. Everybody wants to see him succeed. He's a great manager, a benefactor of prodigies, and his cheap, high-quality water helps the local industry, supporting breweries, distilleries, a paper mill, and even a paint factory. His success is everyone else's success, and Ainville is booming because of him. A true great man he is. But the success begins to draw some shady characters into the area. Raider gangs from the abandoned areas in the south start harassing the town. The townsfolk organize into a militia and manage to fend off the attackers, but just barely. Dozens die to gunshot wounds, and the townsfolk come together on the main square to honor the dead. At the ceremony, Billy Bob delivers a speech lamenting their heroic sacrifice. He ends his speech by announcing the foundation of a permanent security force under his control to defend the town, so that nothing like this will happen ever again. Anyone can enlist. The gear and training are provided, together with free company housing and a good salary. A few months later, Blackwater Security already has 100 members who, aside from guarding the perimeters, also patrol inside Ainville to keep up the order. That way, people no longer have to bother with organizing militias and neighborhood watches and have more time to spend freely. The next raider attack gets repelled much easier thanks to the organized, semi-professional defense force. Though casualties are minimal, the raiders manage to do significant damage to certain parts of the town. Billy Bob wants to pay for the reconstruction out of his own pocket, announcing his intentions in front of a cheering crowd. He also suggests building a defensive structure around the town, which he would gladly help finance, but most of the money would come from people's pockets. At first, not everyone is on board with the idea, but in a few months following raider sightings and a massive pro-wall campaign, which appears to be grassroots but is financed completely by Billy Bob from the shadows, the public opinion shifts and a wall gets built around Ainville. The town becomes completely safe, which gives a boost to its economy and draws in a lot of people from all around the area who move in for that safety and stability. Soon enough, Ainville almost doubles in population thanks to its appeal and the generously low rent prices offered by the Bill and Robert Real Estate Company, which, aside from apartments, also builds a massive fortification at the center of the town as Billy Bob's pet project. It's an added second line of defense that people can retreat to in case the wall got breached. This added security draws in even more people and consequently causes significant appreciation in property prices. Everyone is in favor of building the fort. Once completed, Billy Bob moves his entire headquarters inside it. At this point, Billy Bob owns the water system, the land around town, multiple mines, workshops, foundries, a huge number of buildings in town, a security force, a wall, and a fort. And all these are run by the managers under him, who also grow in power and influence with him, organizing different aspects of life, and are only accountable to Billy Bob personally. Billy Bob is a great man who has done so much for Ainville, and he would like to see some more compensation for his efforts. He announces the need for a contribution from everyone living inside the walls to finance the upkeep of all the defenses. Most people agree to it, and those who don't are offered to move outside the walls. If they refuse, Blackwater Security will simply evict them. Now, this is of course a risky move in terms of PR, so Billy Bob proceeds to buy up as many local news outlets as he can, or at least try to fill their ranks with writers secretly paid by him. Despite his efforts though, word spreads around town that Billy Bob has gone to too far and needs to be stopped. Still, only a small minority of the population takes part in this, the rest being more than satisfied with their growing living standards under Billy Bob. Anti-Billy Bob movements are formed, but are consequently squashed by Blackwater agents working with Billy Bob's growing network of informants. Members are tried in the Blackwater court system, popularly accepted as the biggest and most efficient body to dispense justice in Ainville. Over time, people inside the walls become a sort of higher-class citizenry who have access to high-quality public services in exchange for their taxes and loyalty to Billy Bob. Those outside the walls don't pay taxes, but no public services are provided to them unless they pay a hefty quote-unquote outskirts premium and can only be inside the town center between 8 AM and 9 PM. Those who want to move inside the city walls won't be let in by Blackwater security unless they pay a quote-unquote settlement premium, a fee designed to keep up the prestige of living inside the walls. Those on the outside have of course limited access to all the jobs and opportunities on the inside. Therefore, they have to get by mostly on agricultural work, for which they get rations and housing. The new unspoken rule spreads around town. Billy Bob will give you law and order, stability and prosperity, but for that you must pay your dues and not question his authority under any circumstances. Those who do get fined or even exiled, depending on the severity, but for each exile there are 5 newcomers to take their place, wanting to participate in the stable economy and society. Okay, alright, so what do we have here? A well-protected town with a fortified administrative center. Outside there is a lower class mostly working the fields. Inside we have a privileged citizen class, and most aspects of life are controlled by a sort of nobility who are only accountable to the man above them. And of course most of everything is owned by that man alone. So through this simulation, by starting out with the most ideal circumstances possible for an AnCap society to rise, we ended up with a sort of enlightened feudalism. And why wouldn't we? You know, capitalism is fundamentally based on a government-like hierarchy. One that isn't democratic. So once you introduce a power vacuum by ending the government, it makes sense that capitalism will fill that vacuum, but this time with a truly autocratic structure. You know, I always hear these libertarians and AnCaps whine about government tyranny and how taxes are theft, but I mean, when was the last time you had a say in how your workplace is run? Hey, when's the next CEO election coming up? The one you can vote in as well as an employee, not just the rich shareholders. Okay, so this was a lot of fun actually, and I think I'll be giving it a second try, because something must have been wrong, right? Anarcho-capitalism can't just turn into feudalism, right? Well, don't you worry. Next time we'll fine-tune the simulation a bit and experiment with some other possibilities, which are no less interesting. In the meantime, thank you for watching, and please like and subscribe. And also check out my Patreon, link in the description. And I'll be seeing you next time.